Awesome. Thanks, Nathan, for the introduction. And I just wanted to give everyone another welcome. We're really happy to have you for our webinar today on using online data tools in your farm search. And before I dive into how to use these tools and what kind of information you can gather with them, I wanted to talk a little bit about me and why I'm passionate about, first of all, farming, but also online data tools. So as Nathan said, I'm the Illinois FarmLink navigator for the southern portion of the state. Before that, I got my master's in geography and environmental resources at SIU. And actually in that program, for my thesis research, I used GIS pretty extensively for my thesis research, which focused on nitrogen filtration in wetlands. So I used that and also the web soil survey quite a bit, and I found those really intriguing and really helpful. After a short stint as an environmental planner, I quickly realized that my calling was in agriculture. And so I took 3 years working on local farms in the Southern Illinois region. I'm sorry, 2 years in the Southern Illinois region. And then last year I was at a successful farm in Maine that focuses on no-till vegetables. And then this past year, I started my own farm in Carbondale. This is a little picture of my farm here. I'm growing on a small scale. My total property is 15 acres. And I'm not sure about all of your guys' backgrounds, but yeah, I guess I just wanted to emphasize how important these spatial tools are, no matter what size you're growing on. If you're looking at properties that are hundreds or thousands of acres, or just 5 acres, these tools can still be of use to you. So before we dive into the specific tools, I kind of wanted to give you a roadmap of what's ahead. We're going to be looking at 4 different tools, and after each tool, there will be a 5-minute question period. So we can look at specific questions you have about that. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a longer Q&A if you have more questions that we didn't have time to answer. So feel free to write those in the chat or just jot down a note and ask them during that time. So we'll be looking at county GIS systems, which can give us a lot of information like zoning. There's different layers you can use, such as topographic data, aerial photographs, etc. And then we'll also be looking at the web soil survey, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but I know it can be a difficult tool to navigate. So I'm excited to hopefully build your confidence in that. And then we'll also be looking at the Illinois State Geologic Services Well Mapper, which can give some really useful info on if there's a well on your property, or if not, you can look at wells in the area and get a sense of how deep people are drilling and how much those wells are producing. And then lastly, we'll be diving into FEMA's Flood Mapper, which will tell you whether your property is in or near a flood zone. But before we dive in, I did want to just touch on why these tools are so important in the farmland search. And I'm not sure how many of you are actively farming now, but if you are, you know that during the busy season, time is a really valuable resource, and you may not have time to visit all the listings that you're seeing. So one of the reasons to use these tools is to save time, hopefully by being able to weed out some properties without having to make an in-person visit. Of course, you're still going to have to visit in person before you buy a property. It's good to have an inspection and get out there at least once, hopefully multiple times if you can. Secondly, it can help you reduce your risks. So the more you know before buying, particularly things like soil data, flood zones, and other data, it can really help reduce those unknown variables that can come to bite you later if you don't know them. We actually have a previous navigator who had some experience with a client where they identified that there actually might be a flood zone on a property that they were looking at, and they confirmed that with some other sources, and they actually chose not to move forward. So that would have been something where, had they not been looking at all this data, they might not have caught that right away. And then obviously, having more information and being equipped with that knowledge is just going to sharpen your negotiation position when you talk to a landowner or a partner or a bank. So that's just really good background info to have. And then hopefully this makes you feel more confident. Farming has a lot of unknowns, as many of you know, and the more information you can get and the more answers you can get, the more confident you're going to feel going into your farming venture. Okay, so we're going to dive into county geographic information systems. This definition can be a little jargony, so stick with me. I'll try to break it down into something that makes a little bit more sense here. But a broad overview of GIS is that it consists of integrated computer hardware and software that store and manage, analyze, edit, and output geographic data. So what does that mean in common terms? Well, GIS systems basically allow us to look at, to analyze, and to play with spatial data. And farming is inherently spatial, right? Where your drainage is, how is the soil data arrayed over space? How far are you away from your market? Where are you to the closest population centers? All these are spatial considerations which GIS can help us look at. So I'm hoping that this tool will help answer some of those questions for you. And then kind of narrowing in our focus to county GIS, most counties in Illinois will provide a GIS system to the public, and it's free of charge. Not all counties will provide this service, but most will. So check in the counties where you're looking for property and see if they have a GIS site. And then these sites can also vary pretty greatly in their complexity and how many layers they're going to have available for use. So oftentimes the more rural and less populated counties are going to have more basic sites, but they're still worth taking advantage of. And then the more populous counties, particularly in the Chicagoland region and the Northeast Illinois region, will have more complex sites with more available data layers. So what kind of information can we get on these sites? Well, to start, we can get some basic information about the property, including zoning and tax info, how big is the property, what's the acreage, information on previous owners. You can look at taxes over the years and a lot more, and we'll dive into that in the exercise. Secondly, we can use measurement and draw tools to kind of interact and play with the property. And I found the measurement tool to actually be really helpful. You can measure both linear distance and area. And some scenarios where that might come in handy is if you see in the listing that there's a forested area and then there's also an open pasture or an open crop field, but it doesn't tell you a breakdown in acreage. You can use this measurement tool to calculate those areas. And then similarly, you can use the linear distance measurement tool to look at maybe how many feet of road frontage there is, or how many feet of fencing you'd have to put up around a paddock, things like that. And then you can also use the draw tool to just to play with and kind of see how your farming operation might fit on the landscape. So that can be helpful to visualize as well. And then lastly, but most importantly, these GIS sites include layers. And I'll show you specifically what that looks like on the site. But these can show things like aerial photographs. The specific site we're going to be looking at has aerial photographs from the 1930s all the way up to near present. So you can see how the landscape changes over time, which can be really interesting and helpful. There are often land cover data sets, topography data sets, which I found particularly useful when searching for my property, because oftentimes in a photograph of a field, you can't quite tell how undulating it is, and that can be an important thing to know for crop production. You can also find things like wetlands, FEMA flood zone, zoning, soil types, and many, many more, and we'll dive into those. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start our first exercise. I just want to reiterate that these tools can be a little bit complex, and so if you have trouble following along, know that we will post this on YouTube, so you can try it out at your own pace. And I do also encourage you to try this out on your own with your own county, preferably either after this webinar or in the next couple days, just while it's fresh. And again, I'll be available by email to answer any questions you may have. So I'm going to load up Lake County's GIS site. Okay. So first I want to start off by talking about how to navigate these sites. This should be pretty intuitive for a lot of you if you've used something like Google Earth. But up in this top left portion of your screen, you're going to see the zoom in and the zoom out. You're going to click and drag to pan. just like Google Maps. And then if you get, way out of whack and you're not looking at what you want to be looking at, you can always click this back arrow here and it'll bring you back to your previous extent. And then if you click this home button, it's going to bring you back to the default setting. So if you ever get lost, you can use the back button or the home button to bring you where you need to be. You can use this address bar here to search a property, which I'll go ahead and do now. I've picked one out in Gurnee. And it's going to bring you to your site. Sometimes these search bars can be a little finicky. I've used a few county sites where it's really hard to enter the address in the exact form they want it to actually display a result. If that happens, I recommend just manually kind of zooming in to where the property is. You may have to pull up Google Maps on the side and kind of help yourself navigate. But as long as you can get to the property, we can find all this data. So I want to point your attention first up to the top right corner here. You're going to see a lot of icons. First, we have the legend. There's nothing populated here because we don't have any layers selected yet, but I'll show you what that looks like afterwards. We also have the layers tool, and we're going to dive into that in just a second, but this is where you can access a lot of these data layers. But I want to draw your attention to the base map gallery, and I'm going to select aerial photographs. And so we can see our property boundary here. But I wanted to point your attention to all the historic aerials, which I find really helpful and interesting. And I'm going to click on the aerial from 1939. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So you can see there's no development. The fields look quite a bit different. There's actually a bit less forest. And we can go to the aerial from 1946 and then to 1961 and then to 74. You're going to start seeing a lot of suburban development down in the south here. And let's see here. Yep, here's a 1993. We're going to see a lot more starts being developed, and then we'll go to present. So it's kind of fun just to play around with and see how the landscape's changed. Obviously, this property is going to be under a lot more development pressure now. And there are a lot more base maps that you can explore. And each county is going to have different options here. So next, I want to talk about how to access parcel information. So if you left click on the property, it's going to bring up the property boundary as well as this tax parcel information pop-up window. And this gives us just some basic information about the township. It talks about the zoning, and you can actually click on this hyperlink, and it's going to bring you to a brief description of what the different zoning abbreviations stand for, and another link to bring you to the county zoning classifications. But I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that. And that's the legal description right here. But if we scroll down and click on property record search, it's going to bring up all the county's data for this this property, which is more than we have time to dive into, but I do want to touch on a few things. First of all, that we're zoned here under class as farming, which is obviously important. And then also you can find acreage here and some more general information down below. And then I also wanted to bring your attention on the left here. If you go to tax payment history, you can find a lot of historic tax information and see how much the tax rates have been changing and what your current tax obligation would be. So you can see down here in 2002, started at about 9,000 and is now up to 19,000. So the taxes would be fairly high on this property. And now I'd like to dive into the layers, which is where it really gets fun. So we're going to click on these 3 tiles up here in the top right to open the layer list. And we're going to start out by looking at topography. So you're going to scroll down, you'll click the checkbox, and then you'll click this drop-down menu, and we're going to select 1-foot contours. And I'm hoping you guys can all see that. So now what we're seeing is 1-foot contour intervals superimposed on top of the property. And I briefly mentioned this before, but this can be hard to see from pictures. I grow vegetables. I'm not sure what all you are interested in, but I prefer, as flat of ground as possible. And so if it's changing quite a bit within a field, that makes my life a little bit more difficult. So it was nice to be able to use this to see how the elevation changed over space. I'm assuming most of you know how to read topographic maps, but if you don't, these red lines here are the 5-foot increments. So our high point is up here around the 750, and we're moving down this way until we hit 730 at this red line, and it looks like about 725 at the road here. So it looks like the property kind of generally grades that way. So this is really helpful to be able to really visualize the elevation of a property. I'm going to go ahead and deselect that. And we're going to go ahead and look at the National Flood Hazard Layer, which is put out by FEMA. And you're going to want to, there's a lot of sub layers here, but the ones that we care about are the flood hazard boundaries and the flood hazard zones. I'm going to zoom out briefly. And these areas to the north of us are the flood hazard zones. And I'm going to dive into this in more depth in the FEMA section, but I did want to show you that many counties will display this information in their layer section. So it's nice to be able to access all that data from here instead of hopping around different sites. But just briefly, this red and blue polygon feature is a regulatory floodway, which means that it likely floods every season. And then this blue polygon that's a little bit wider than it is the 100-year flood interval. And we'll dive into more about what that means when we get to the FEMA section. So I'm going to zoom back out here. Let's hit the back button. Get back to our property. And I'm going to deselect the flood layer. And lastly, we're going to look at soils. So let's see if I can find that. So I'm going to click on soil. I'm going to click the drop down, and we have a lot of pretty cool layers to play with here. The first is agricultural land use. So if we select that, it just gives us basic classifications. So this is cropland, home site, and other farm non-agricultural uses. It's kind of stuff we already knew, but we can select soils. And this gives us the USDA soil classification ID number, which you can then look up to get a description. But I'll show you how to use that or find that in more data in the web soil survey. Next, we can select hydric soils. And I'm sure most of you are aware, but hydric soils refer to soils that are either saturated or inundated with water for most of the year. And this can cause anoxic conditions and low oxygen environments for soil life. So crops don't grow as well here. And so obviously if a lot of your growing space was listed as hydric soils, that would kind of cue you in to maybe do a lot of soil tests and ask a lot of questions before pulling the trigger on a property. But it looks like the growing space here wouldn't have any hydric soils. Next, we'll look at highly erodible soils. And we'll see that there is a section of highly erodible soils right here. And this makes sense based on what we saw from the topography layer, because this is our high point and we're kind of moving down towards the low here. So something to keep in mind if you're going to be tilling up that area. Lastly, we're going to look at prime ag soils. And if it is a prime soil, it's just going to be in this green color. And it looks like a good portion of our property is prime ag. But we'll get more soil data when we look at the web soil survey. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the layers. And we are going to jump into the measurement and draw tools, which I find pretty useful. So up here in the top right, you'll see this ruler, and we'll select that. And you're going to see two different measurement tools, one being the polygon measurement tool right here, and the other being the linear distance measurement tool. So I'm going to go ahead and select the area tool, and then I'm going to change the units to acres here. And then to select the area you want to measure, you're going to left click at each of the nodes of the polygon you want to measure, and then double click to finish, and it'll give you an area measurement. So we can see that this field here is roughly 9 acres. Again, things I might use this tool for are figuring out, how big a pond is, how much forest versus pastures on a property, how big the home site is, etc. And then next you can click on the ruler with the arrows, and that's the linear distance tool. And then we'll select the units, which let's do feet. And for this, you will left click and drag and then double click to end. And we can see that we have about 1,200 feet of road frontage. You could also use this for other things, such as figuring out how much perimeter fencing you needed, you know, how long a driveway is, any distance between 2 points. This can be really helpful. And then to clear your measurement, you just hit the clear button and you could do another one. So that's the measurement tool. And then I just lastly briefly want to touch on the draw tool here. I don't use this in this application very much. I find it easier to either print the map out and draw on it physically, or to use this, the drawing functions in Arc Online. But if you like this, feel free to play around, and you know, you can put markers on house sites or barns. You can label different fields, draw polygons, do whatever you want to try to visualize your farm operation on the site. So that's the draw tool, and that's actually the end of the exercise here. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. And I just want to give a few closing thoughts on County GIS. Again, these sites aren't all going to look exactly the same, but a lot of them will use Arc Online, which is a hosting service, and they'll use those to host their site. So many of these should look pretty similar. And if you followed along today, you should have no problem navigating your own county site. Again, I encourage you to play around with a few sites and make sure you feel confident with them as soon as possible after this. And my email will be provided at the end of this presentation so that you can reach out to me with any questions you might have. So I want to open it up quickly to questions if anybody has anything from that exercise.
Yes, so please put your questions in the chat. And I guess one question I have for you, Noah, right away is if you were going to print from that, is there any special trick to being able to print a map from a site like that? Yeah.
Often there's up in the top right with the icons, there's usually a print button.
Okay.
And it'll let you print to PDF, and then you can either choose to save that to your computer or print it hard copy.
Got it. Thanks, Noah. There's a question from Fawn. Is there a layer for springs and intermittent creeks, streams, runs?
It depends on the county. Oftentimes there's one for wetlands, and there may be some for water bodies. But I would just encourage people looking at properties to really tap, you know, neighbors, previous landowners, people that have seen that land through the seasons, if possible, because oftentimes there's contextual information that just is not caught on online data tools. So it's important to tap those resources that are local.
Excellent. There's a question from Tony, not about GIS exactly, but do you have a preferred search engine for finding parcels that are for sale?
Great question. Nathan, I might actually tap you for that one. I don't have a particular, I don't have a particular engine I like best. I actually personally found my property. I saw a sign up there for a couple years, and I had visited it several times. And I actually used County GIS in my county to look up the owner's name, and I gave him a call because the sign was actually down when I was actually ready to buy. So yeah, my experience might not be as applicable there.
Yeah, that's actually a tough one, I would say. I mean, we use Google, but then there are different realtor sites that sometimes have different properties. And I would say we're still probably not in a place to make a definitive judgment about that. Another question from Sharon, should you measure the distance from the flood zone area to the actual property?
You can, but that's not really going to tell you all that much necessarily, because flood zones are so much based on elevation as well. So I would say, first of all, look to see if you're in a flood zone, and we will talk about that in the FEMA section. But then again, I'm going to encourage, you know, talking to people that know the area. And again, I'll draw from my own experience. I laid all my plots out in what I thought was going to be really dry, well-drained ground. And, you know, I ended up having a little bit of drainage issues in the spring because I hadn't seen that property in the spring before. And a neighbor approached me and was like, yeah, I was surprised you put your fields right there because I saw that, you know, there'd be standing water there some springs. So if I had, you know, if I had talked to all the neighbors and kind of picked their brain, I might have averted that. So that would definitely be my recommendation there. So kind of get your first layer of evidence from the online tools. And then if you move forward, definitely pick the brain of the local people.
So speaking of search engines, Noah, if you want to find the GIS system for a county, how would you suggest searching for that?
Yeah, my preferred search engine is Google, but use your preferred one. And then I type in just the county's name along with GIS, and usually it'll be in the top 1 to 3 results there. And you may have to do a little bit of navigation. It might bring you to the county site, and then you'll have to like scroll down and click on the GIS web application link, but should be pretty easy to find. And if you can't find it, again, feel free to email me and I'm happy to help.
Great. Let's see, with that, I think while we move to the next section, and while we're doing that, we'd love it if everyone would share their name in the chat and the county that they're in. That would be great to see.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my video for the next part of the presentation here. Okay, so the next tool I wanted to talk about is the web soil survey. I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with this, but it can be a daunting tool, and there's actually a lot of kind of hidden features that I actually didn't know about for quite a while. So I'm hoping that this exercise will give you access to some more information that you didn't know was available. So what is the web soil survey? Well, it's an online tool provided by the United States Department of Ag as well as the NRCS to provide users with valuable soil information for a given area. And on there, we can find a lot of soil information. For instance, soil texture, hydraulic conductivity, slope, depth to fragipan, and a lot more information. And we'll provide some examples here that I think will be applicable to you. But I did first want to talk about, first of all, how we can use this data, but also the limitations it might have. So again, we're trying to reduce the time that we spend in our search here. So if we can get some soil data from the comfort of our home, that's a win. And we're going to weed out properties that maybe don't have ideal soil characteristics. I've personally found the web soil survey data to be really good and applicable. However, nothing replaces taking soil samples before actually buying a property. And also just, stick a shovel in the ground and kind of get a sense for what you're working with. I really believe in the senses too, as a farmer. I do just want to remind that soil samples are a snapshot in time. So yeah, I don't often put all my weight in one soil sample, but rather look at trends over time. And the soil survey is actually based on samples that they've taken over space. However, it's important to note that there's probably not been a bunch of soil samples on your farm that the WSS is using. They're probably interpolating between soil samples they've taken. So they might be averaging between those points. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the exercise. Again, same format. If you have questions, we'll do a 5-minute answer at the end of the exercise here. I'm going to go ahead and reset this. Okay, so when you load the soil survey, this is what it's going to look like. There can be a lot of tabs on this, so it can get a little bit confusing. And if you get lost, again, please look at the YouTube to kind of slowly go at it or go through it at your own pace. But we're going to start up here with these tabs at the top. And I'm going to clear that. And you're going to see that only the area of interest tab is accessible to us right now. We can't access the soil map, the soil data explorer, or the shopping cart. And that's because we haven't described our area of interest to the web app. So if we come down here to the quick navigation bar and the address bar, I'm actually going to type in the address of my farm here and click search. And it's going to bring us to my farm property here. And the way we navigate on the site here is if we click the hand, we can click and drag. It's been a little slow here. Sorry about that. And then we also have the zoom in and the zoom out feature. And then this globe here will bring you back out to full extent. And if you accidentally do that and you didn't mean to, just like with the GIS, you can click the back button and get back to where you were. So I'm going to try to zoom in here just on my property and drag. Okay. So what we have to do before we can access any soil information is create an area of interest. And these two icons on the right here are the area of interest delineation icons. So this one with a rectangle will allow you to either make a square or a rectangle area of interest. But since my property isn't a perfect rectangle, I'm going to use the polygon. And just like with the measurement tool on County GIS, you're just going to click at each node and delineate your boundary, and then double click to finish. And you can see that anywhere inside this polygon now is what we're basically asking the app to provide us data for. So now we've created our area of interest. I'm going to go to the top here, and now you'll see that we've created our area of interest, that we have the soil map tab and the soil data explorer tab available to us. So I'm going to go ahead and select soil map and scroll down, and you can see that within each of these delineations here, we have a different code. So you can see this area here, as well as this area here, are 214C3. So then how I go to read soil data from this is I go over to the left and I'll see 214C3. So this is the map unit symbol we're looking at. And if we go to the right here, we can see that this makes up almost 50% of the soil on my property. And then if you want more soil information about that specific map unit, you can click on the hyperlink and it's going to bring up this map unit description. So in the beginning, it's just going to give you like really basic information like climate, frost-free period, elevation, that kind of thing. But as you scroll down, it's going to be more specific. So we can see that this profile is silt loam up to 10 inches, and then quite a bit more clay down to 30. And there's a lot more information down here below. You can see that it's moderately well drained. But as I said, don't put all your eggs in that basket, because my soil isn't as well drained as I'd like. You can also see that the fragipan layer is about 31 inches down. And yeah, feel free to explore more of that on your own. And you could do that for each of the different soil types in the map area of interest. So that's really useful, just like a generic description of the soil. But many of you are probably wondering, well, how do I find pH or carbon content or things that might be a little more applicable to you. And that's what we'll touch on next. So if we go to the top again, we're going to click on Soil Data Explorer. And another set of tabs appears here. So I know this can get a little bit confusing. I want to direct your attention first to the Intro to Soils. So if you ever have questions on what any of the soil properties and qualities that we're going to go over mean, you can come here and select any of this information, and it's going to give you a lot of background on this. So this is Soils 101, but you can also get pretty in depth on all these different topics. Next over to the right is suitabilities and limitations for use. We're not really going to touch on this because this is more geared towards engineering and building, but this is here if you're interested. But what we're going to focus on is soil properties and qualities. And we're going to touch on 3 examples here that I think will be applicable to you. The first is going to be pH. So we're going to go to Soil Health Properties and click the drop down. And then we're going to go ahead and click on pH here. And we're going to, yeah.
We're lagging a little bit, so there you go. It's taking just a few more seconds than you expect for those things to pop up.
Oh, my apologies. I'll go ahead and slow down just a little bit. Okay, so we want to make sure that map, table, and description of the rating are selected. We're going to go ahead and leave all these settings as default, but you can play with them if you want. But we do need to set a top depth. So this basically just tells us how many inches or centimeters of soil we want to look at. I'm going to go ahead and do 10 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and click View Rating. And so you're going to see that up in the top here, we again have these soil descriptions, and we have the table below it with the soil descriptions, but also the rating. And the rating is basically telling us that, for instance, 214B, which is right here, has a pH of 5.5. This area down here has a pH of 5.9. And this actually tracks really well to what I found with both soil tests and also a local farmer that I had out who, without any prior information other than what grass species he saw and what he saw of the soil texture, he told me I'd probably be at around 5.5. So again, it's nice to have those several avenues of information to come up with a good decision. All right, next I'm gonna go ahead and look at organic matter. So we're gonna close this. And we're gonna go to soil physical properties right here. And we're gonna navigate down to organic matter and select that. And again, we're gonna do 110. But for this one, instead of doing all layers weighted, we're gonna go ahead and do surface layer. And the reason for this is because organic matter is often in that top couple inches. So then we're gonna click view rating. And you can see, again, we have the soil descriptions. And for 214B, we've got an organic matter percent of 1.5. For the one below it, we have about 1%. And then for the often inundated area, we have 2.5%. So that can be pretty helpful base information. And that corresponded decently well to my soil test, but not perfectly. So definitely take a look at this. And then lastly, I want to talk about drainage. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And we will go to soil qualities and features. Click the drop down. And there's drainage class. And for here, you don't have to put in any depth or anything, because it's just going to populate whether it's drained well or not. And you're going to see that most of my farm is classified as moderately well drained. But I do have a pretty high clay content, and it doesn't drain as quickly as I'd like. So again, that's an encouragement to do a little bit more of in-person research, but this is a good place to start. So that's going to be the last example for this, but I did want to point out that you can print these out to PDF and bring it with you to a property viewing, or just save for your own use later. So if you go up here and click printable version, you can play with the different settings here and then click view. And sometimes it can take a second, but it will create like a pretty nice looking map for you with a legend and descriptions of whatever property you were looking at. So you could do this for each of the different characteristics we just looked at. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to the presentation here. And any questions on that? I know that's a lot of information. So again, if you're feeling overwhelmed at all, definitely check the YouTube video after and reach out to me if you have any questions.
We actually had a comment from Tanya, I believe, from Savannah Institute, saying that the ecological sites are cool here too. Tanya, do you want to unmute and just say something very briefly about that?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think that those are useful tools as well to look at the ecological classifications, just because sometimes you'll find, despite landform changes and whatnot, that there is still some type of an overlay between what plants are currently thriving on site and what ecosystem types they're associating it with per that soil data. And from there, that's practically, relevant, because we can then infer what plants might work really well for us as growers, right? So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. And the last thing I'll say is it also might help us encourage different types of habitat types for local, critters and whatnot, pollinators, to say the least.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanya.
That's great.
Yeah.
Number of other questions we have for you personally. This is from Tony. What soil characteristics are a red flag? What data might make you run away from a property?
Yeah, if I had any more hydric soils, I would definitely run away. It's a lot easier to add water than take it away. So that's a big one. And then it depends what kind of operation you're doing. But me personally, I'm doing no-till vegetables, and I add a lot of compost. So for me, natural fertility of the soil isn't as big of an issue because I'm adding a lot of carbon, and I do a lot of cover cropping as well. So I'm really working on my soil health in a lot of ways. And so I'm hoping to build that soil. So I didn't necessarily need that to start, though it would have been nice. We're not as blessed with carbon rich soils down here as the center of the state has. So
We have another question. Is there a number about loss of soil per year per acre, or like a low erosion quotient or some indication of erosion that might be happening?
I'm not particularly sure, other than using that erosion layer. Yeah, I don't think you're going to find that on the tools that I was looking at. But if somebody else has more info on that, feel free to chime in.
Okay, and then Fawn has a question. I'm not sure if I fully understand it. Maybe you do, Noah. Is there a Bailey's ecoregion layer to look at?
I'm not sure what Bailey's is.
Yeah, Fawn, can you unmute and just share your question? Maybe Noah or Tanya can answer that.
Can you hear me? I guess I should put
Yep.
the video on. Okay, so Bailey's is used for ecologists, and it's nationwide, and it can drill down to a property. And we're using it for our pollinators garden for our church, just so that, as was mentioned, for pollinators, it's nice to know what native plants will fit where. So it's
Okay.
it can be found in other sites, but I just thought a Bailey's would be a neat layer. But
Okay,
this is very powerful. Thank you.
excellent. Thank you, Fawn. Any other questions before we keep moving? All right. Yeah, let's keep moving along.
Awesome. And Nathan, was there still a bit of a lag, or can I go ahead at normal speed here?
There was a lag for like the last 5 minutes. So when you were pressing things, sometimes we weren't seeing the response, even as you were kind of explaining what we were going to see next.
Okay, well, yeah, feel free to stop me if that continues to be the case.
Okay, got it.
Alrighty, so I'll go ahead and move on to the next topic here, which is going to be the Illinois State Geologic Services Well Mapper. And I found this to be really useful because I installed a well on my property. First of all, you can find well locations, so you can see whether there is one on your property or if there's ones on properties close by. And then we can gather information from the well driller logs. So well drillers are required to report to the state or to the county, and we have access to that information. So we can see who the drilling companies are that are doing wells in your region. I personally kind of nerd out on geologic data, so I like seeing what layers they're drilling through as they put in the well. We also see total well depth, how wide the casing is or what the diameter is, which is useful for figuring out how much water is stored in the volume of the well. And then probably most importantly, we can look at gallons per minute and see what the production of the well is and see if it's enough for our farming operation as well as maybe our household needs. But yeah, why is this information helpful? Well, if there is a well on the property, we want to be equipped with the knowledge to better evaluate that. So is it old? And if so, has the well pump been replaced? What kind of pump does it have? And how productive is the well? Is it enough gallons per minute to supply our needs? And then if there's not one on site, but you think you might install one, we can look at wells in the area to get a really general sense of how deep and productive they are to give us an estimate on depth. And looking at depth can be an okay analog for estimating cost. There's a lot of other factors that go into cost, such as the price of the pump, which can be up to $5,000 or $6,000. But obviously, the further you drill, the more expensive the well is going to be. Okay, so with that, we're going to dive into the exercise here. Are you guys tracking with me here, Nathan? All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead here. So just like the county GIS site, we have these navigation tools on the left. So zoom in, zoom out, home extent, and you can go back. So that should be pretty straightforward. I'm gonna go ahead and type in my property again here. Select my property. And this is going to bring me to my property. And I'm, again, just like the GIS site, I'm going to click these 4 tiles up here to change the base map. So I'm changing the base map. Nathan, are you guys with me?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Okay. So I'm changing the base map just because I prefer to look at the aerial imagery. And I just put my well in, so there's no well showing up right next to my property. But if we zoom out, we'll see all of these blue dots in the area, and you'll see a number next to them. And that number tells you how deep the well is. But I'm gonna go ahead and select this property. So just click on that dot, and you're gonna see a information window pop up. And this gives us just really basic information to start. So, you know, what's the area that it's in, what's the lat long. It's also going to tell us the driller. And this was actually helpful for me because I wasn't sure who the go-to well drillers were in the area. And it turns out that Beanland and Sons kind of runs the area in my neck of the woods and actually across the river too in Missouri. So that's kind of where I got the lead to reach out to him. Then you can also see the date drilled. So this well was drilled in 2003. So it's 20 years old now. So it'd be time to kind of ask some questions about the pump and what shape the well's in. We can see the total depth here is 293 feet. So fairly deep, which kind of cues me in that maybe if I were to drill a well, I might have to go somewhat deep as well. Formation refers to where they hit adequate water. And so that means they hit it in sandstone. And they hit adequate water at 270 feet down, and they stopped drilling at 293 feet. So that means there's 23 feet of well that is supplying water. And the pumping rate is 20 gallons per minute, which is pretty good, at least for the size operation that I'm doing. And for honestly, for probably many operations. And we can get a little bit more info here if we click on the more info tab. This is the well driller's report. And you can see the different layers that they went through. These well drillers have been doing this for years oftentimes, but they're not trained geologists. So the terms they use aren't going to be exact. They're not, you know, geologically correct necessarily. But they're going through sandstone here, and then it changes to shale and back to sandstone. And then they actually hit their water in the white sandstone at 270 feet. And then below that, we can see the casing diameter, and it's 6 1/4 inches. Standard is between 6 and 8 inches, so this is pretty standard. They cased it from ground level to 70 feet down, and they likely stopped casing it because the well bore was, or the hole was stable enough at that point to no longer put casing down there. And then you can see what they sealed it with. This is pretty typical. They seal it with bentonite clay to make sure that they don't get any contamination or anything seeping down around the well casing. And then this is all the information we saw from before. However, I will highlight that there's a permanent pump installed at 200 feet down. So yeah, that is something that you'd want to check on, being that it's 20 years old, and that'd be hard just at an inspection. So you'd want to ask some questions about this well. Yep, and then that's just information about the driller, what farm it's on, and the date that it was drilled. So I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to open it up to questions.
All right, no, there was a question that Tanya also had an answer for, which was, does the well layer show what the aquifer is? And
Oh, great question.
Tanya said you can find aquifer data through the Illinois Geospatial Data Clearinghouse. But do you want to answer that question too? And maybe if that's the correct answer, explain what that clearinghouse is.
Yeah, that might be a little bit past the scope of this presentation, because you'd have to have access to Arc Online. I will actually bring us back here. There we go. See if I can find it on the fly here. Oftentimes, yeah, you can look at the aquifers here. Let's see here. Yeah, it'd probably be best to to use the data from the clearinghouse, but you could play around with these. I haven't actually messed with these too much, but that's a great question.
You know what, is there I believe that wells have to be tested from time to time? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so after you drill a well, oftentimes the county is responsible for coming out and testing the water quality. And they'll give you data on how hard the water is and if it's contaminated.
Okay. We have a question for a small operation, 3 to 5 acres, vegetables with just a few animals. What do you believe is the minimum gallons per minute necessary?
Will there be any, will that be supplying a household as well?
Yeah, Tony, why don't you unmute and just say a little bit more? He just said yes.
Okay. Yeah, my go-to rule of thumb is about 5 GPM per acre. There are a few other factors that will contribute to whether that's enough. Primarily being how big the reservoir in the well is. So how deep they went in the formation, because otherwise you can pump it dry. There might not be as much of a buffer, but I would say about 5 gallons per minute per acre if you're going to be irrigating pretty intensely.
Okay. Tony, did that help you? All right,
Yes,
I'm
it
gonna
did.
assume.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Let's see here. I have a question, actually, Noah, real quick on the hydric soils. We were talking with the web soil survey. Speaking of
Yeah.
water, if there's hydric soils, but someone puts drain tile in, can that remove the issue of the hydric soils?
Yeah, I would definitely look for more information on that. But in my experience
Okay.
and from what I've heard from people, yes, that can solve the issue. But that soil has developed in anoxic conditions for a while. So it may take a little bit of time for the soil life and those soil connections that you want to move back in there under the
Okay.
new conditions.
Got it. Okay, that's super helpful. Does anyone else have any other questions about the wells? All right. Well, hearing none, we can move forward.
All righty. I'm gonna go ahead and stop my video again. Okay, so I know we touched briefly on the FEMA Flood Mapper in the county GIS portion, but in case the county that you're looking in doesn't have this, I want to make sure that you have access to this data. So there is data for this for anywhere in the US. There are 2 different types of flood zones we'll look at with FEMA. The first being a regulatory floodway, which is this red and blue zone here. And this refers to areas that are frequently flooded and likely you shouldn't be farming in those. I will note though, I mean, you see fields here that are in the frequent flooded area. So if you're looking at a property, in a drought or just in a drier time of the year, you might not even know if you're not looking at this. So important to check. And then this blue region is the 1% annual chance flood hazard zone. And this is often also referred to as a 100-year flood zone. And this is defined as an area that has a 1% chance of being flooded in a given year. However, I do want to kind of add some context to that. I'm a little bit of a hydrology nerd, and there's this term called stationarity or non-stationarity that refers to these recurrence intervals being calculated based on historic numbers. And obviously we've done a lot of engineering and changing of the landscape, and that affects how water moves and how water floods. And in addition, there's greater climate variability. So all that to say, there's increased uncertainty about those flooding probabilities. So look at this data, but then also take a risk assessment and see what you're comfortable with taking on. And then again, I know I've said this many times in the presentation, but I can't say it enough. Always consult the local people because they've, been there for years and they've seen, that flood or that field that floods every spring, or that little drainage that backs up when you get 3 inches of water. That's invaluable information and can save you a lot of headache and a lot of money. So definitely tap those resources. Okay, and with that, we will jump into this. We won't spend too much time on it because I know we're at 8 o'clock here. Let me go ahead and pull this up. And again, they're using Arcgis as their host, so it looks pretty similar to the other tools. We got the zoom in and zoom out and the home button and the address bar. And so I'm going to go ahead and search my farm again here. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay, and so we can see there's no flood zones over my property. Well, hold on, let me back up here. So let's go to the 3 tiles at the top. And we just want to make sure that the NFHL, which is the flood hazard layer, is selected. And you can play with all these different subcategories, but the ones that are really important are the flood hazard zones and the flood hazard boundaries. But both of those should be selected as a default. But if they're not, definitely make sure to check those. And this is Drury Creek over here. There's also Sycamore Creek close by. And you'll see that I'm decently close to a regulatory floodway, which is this big red region, red and blue region here. And then there's also a 100-year zone as well here. Yeah, so I'm not really in danger at my farm of being flooded from this creek. However, I do have some small drainages, which I'll point out, maybe. I actually have a drainage that runs under the road and right here. And if we get more than 2 inches, this will back up pretty significantly. And I don't have any fields near that area, so it hasn't been too much of a problem. But that's something I couldn't tell when I saw the property in August. But if I had talked to any of the neighbors, they would have been able to tell me that, because it actually kind of washes out the road if we get a lot of rain. So that's what I wanted to cover here on FEMA. I know that was a pretty quick tour of that tool, but feel free to play around with it, and I'm happy to hop on a call with you if you have any questions. So I'm going to head back to the presentation here.
All right, so Noah, we have a question, which actually I think is a really good one, which is, what is meant by a 100-year flood zone?
Yeah, let me go back to that slide here. So 100-year flood zone is just another term for the 1% annual chance flood hazard zone, oftentimes referred to as a 100-year flood zone by hydrologists. And what people mean by that is basically that, every 100 years there's going to be a big flood there, but that's actually not how probability works. You could have 3 100-year floods in 3 consecutive years. And actually, I did my research in the Mississippi River floodplain, and we had several years of historic flooding within 5 years. So just because it says 1 in 100 years doesn't mean that you'll just have one flood. Hope that helps. Feel free. I'm happy to clarify that more if you have more of a question there.
So Noah, these lines look very precise, and with climate change and like very intense weather systems that are increasing, like, do we have to assume that maybe those lines aren't exact, and that maybe there could be 100-year floods that go beyond what they're showing?
Yeah, I would add a little bit of uncertainty to these boundaries, and proceed with caution if you're close by. And another big factor is the amount of concrete that's come up in the last 80 years. That increases the speed with which water reaches these creeks. And so they'll build up and flood a lot quicker than they used to. There's not that natural landscape to soak in as much water and slow down the speed of the water. So we have been seeing really high floods. So definitely something to keep in mind.
Do you think the government would ever change these designations or these areas, or is that unlikely?
I hope so, but I can't speculate. And these flood zones are what are used for insurance purposes and with your bank, most likely. So these zones, they still matter. The exact delineations matter. But then you also, on top of that, kind of have to take a personal risk assessment for your property.
Got it. We have a question. Is I think data from the NOAA Atlas 14?
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question? You cut out just for a second.
Fawn, do you want to share that question?
Sure. NOAA's working on Atlas 15. Atlas 14's out. Because if you look at the Army Corps of Engineers, these flood zones, they're very old. And the climate change certainly is a factor. So I go to a lot of NOAA webinars. I tend to go to them. But so Atlas 15 is being worked on. And I think it's just something to keep in mind that that you may deal with a county that's dealing with old data, which has already been asked about, and that NOAA is talking about. So just be aware that the rate of climate change is not just arithmetic anymore. It's additive with a steep curve up. So that's my kind of wheelhouse stuff, climate change. But anyway, thank you. This has really been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for that addition.
Fun,
That
thank
was
you.
great.
That was super helpful. Super helpful. I don't see any other questions about that. Maybe we can move into the general Q&A. Does that sound okay, Noah? I guess we could probably shut down the presentation and share our screens.
Yeah, let me go ahead and unshare there.
Share our videos. So yeah, so everyone's heard about a lot of different tools. Maybe you're still absorbing those. Would love to have any other questions about any of the tools or using online data tools in general. Any questions? All right, any stories? Any stories about where data was a big help to you in any way in terms of farming? There we go. Okay, question from Tony. Is there a tool that you find is essential and did not quite make the list tonight? That's a great question.
That is a great question. Off the top of my head, those are the 4 that I used in my land search. I will say definitely like check out as many listing sites as you can and compare. And yeah, tap those local resources. But if anybody else has any other tools that they've used that have been helpful, feel free to share.
You want to say anything about Google Earth?
Yeah,
Is that redundant with the county GIS sites?
I personally really like the bird's eye view on Google Earth, which can kind of give you like a from top view, but slightly like zoomed out and from a little lower angle. So it's not just like the directly overhead view. Can kind of give you a nice sense of the property. And you can actually do a bit of the measurement and drawing features on there as well.
Awesome. This is a question you might not know the answer to, but do you think realtors are aware of all this information? Because I sometimes wonder if they're doing this deep dive that you are for your farmland.
Yeah, I guess I would recommend getting a realtor that is well versed in agricultural land.
Yeah,
because they're going to know a little bit more about the ins and outs of that. And maybe reach out and ask them if they are using those tools and suggest it if not.
Okay, we have another good question from Brent. What tools do you think might be helpful for finding old drain tile records and placement?
I'm not sure. Anybody got any insight on that one?
Do we have any collective wisdom here? That's a question we can look up and then get back to with our follow-up email. That's a great question. All right. Barb has a question. Do you go to the county government website to find their GIS maps?
Yeah, I think personally the easiest way to navigate to them is just to search in Google the county's name followed by GIS. And oftentimes that'll take you to the county site, but it'll take you right to the page where you need to go rather than trying to navigate through the county's website. Particularly in my area of the state, some of the county's websites can be really hard to find what you're looking for. So just searching in the Google search bar is often easiest.
Yeah. One of the other interesting things I've found on some of the GIS sites is that they will tell you who owns the property. And so sometimes you'll see like a development company name for a particular property, which for me is sort of like a little indicator that maybe development is coming to that site if it's not a private landowner. And that's the other thing I think is that you can then see if there's one landowner that owns a lot of land around you versus lots of different neighbors and people.
Yeah.
So Noah, what do you recommend? Again, I'm throwing you hard questions. What if you're in a county where they don't have much of a GIS site or no GIS site at all?
Yeah, well, the nice thing is you can find a lot of that information separately. The nice thing about those county sites is that it's all put in one location. But for instance, you can still go to your county's website and find all of that tax parcel information. It's just nice to be able to select the property and pull it up right there. And then similarly with the layers, a lot of that you can find on the government clearinghouse, or you can, look up FEMA. So you'll still be able to find some of that information. But yeah, it's a little bit harder to access.
Got it.
And I'm also happy to create a list after this with our follow-up email of some of those other sites you might want to visit if your county doesn't have one. So you can get access to that as well. You'll just be navigating to more places.
Okay, we have a question. Off the top of your head, do you know who is you in Central Illinois? Who is the best land connection contact in the middle part of the state for these kinds of questions? Actually, Tony, why don't you come on and say a little bit more? We're just about to hire 2 new staff for Central Illinois. They still will need to get some training. We're happy. Myself, Jeannie, and Noah are also happy to help you. Can you just say a little bit more about what kind of help you're looking for?
Yeah, I'm kind of picturing the second stage. That is, I have a property that I'm interested in, but I have a lack of experience, lack of knowledge. Could somebody in the middle part of the state tell me some things to look out for? Tell me if they think the data looks good. So that's what I'm thinking. Once I find something and I think it looks good, would anybody be able to help answer the question, is it really?
I would say number one, so that's actually a challenging question because we don't feel like we're in a position to say for sure whether it's a good property or not. There's so many different factors. As Noah mentioned, it's really important to talk to neighbors. But for starters, I would be happy to have that conversation with you along with Noah and Jeannie. And we'd be happy to look at the data that you have and ask some good questions that maybe you might need to investigate further with. So just reach out to us at Nathan at IllinoisFarmLink.org. I mean, at Nathan at thelandconnection.org or Jeannie at thelandconnection.org. We'll have our emails up. We're really happy to have that conversation with you and talk with you.
Thank you.
Sure. We have a comment from Fawn. She said, my laptop ran out of juice. Had to go inside. Thank you, since I suppose you are finishing up. Great to have you with us, Fawn. Appreciate that. Oh, thanks, Jeannie. Thank you. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Any other are people challenged by lack of information, or what's the number one thing that's kind of maybe challenging you as you consider different kinds of land? Well, actually, we have a question. We have a question here. What are some tips when starting a farm search?
Is that to me?
I think it is, but I'm happy to jump in after you take a first crack at it.
Yeah. I guess my biggest encouragement would be to really think about your life outside the farm too. Like think about what your needs are in terms of do you want to be close to a city? Do you need access to good Wi-Fi? Do you have a partner who's going to need to find work? Like really think about the big picture to really narrow in on your zone and where you want to be. And then once you're at that point, I think, using the traditional search engines and listing services, but then also trying to get out in the community as much as possible, maybe access your local farmers markets and start talking to the market managers and say that you're in the market for some land. And, maybe they know somebody local that hasn't listed their property yet, but it might be coming up for sale soon. If you're able to, I'd say, try to work on a farm in the region. It's a great way to get to know some of the local farmers and really get immersed in that region. Nathan, anything to add to that?
Those are some great answers. No, I would say a few things. Number one, I would talk to someone if you just have a few questions about your financial position, whether it's to lease or to buy, maybe get a good financial advisor. In the north section of Illinois, Compeer Financial has a really good guy who will help you for free and just look at your balance sheet and everything else and give you a sense of what would be a reach versus what would be pretty comfortable for you. I would say give yourself a lot of time. If you're looking for land next year, it's already a little tight. If you can give yourself 2 years, you're more likely to find something that's just right. We've also seen some situations where we encourage people to have kind of a focus where you can build relationships and build community and make connections. But sometimes the area that you want, you may find out that it's too expensive. There aren't good opportunities. There's not the right soils. You may need to shift. And so don't get too locked in over time. We'd be happy to talk more with you about that. That's a great question to ask. We have a statement here, from Jacqueline. We've got Flanagan State Bank here in Central Illinois. That are also helpful with assessing finance and business plans. They are excellent. Question from Tony: how much is too much to pay per acre? That's an impossible question to ask, because it so much depends which county you're in, which part of the county you're in, what kind of development pressure there is. That is a real estate agent can help you with that. You just have to be, depends on the soils. Like there are prime soils in Illinois now that are going for like $20,000, $22,000 per acre. You could also be looking at an acre within 5 miles of that that's very marginal land that might go for 10 or even less. So it's a pretty challenging question.
Yeah, and I'll also add to, go ahead. I was just going to add to that too. It depends on what kind of operation you're looking to run as well. If you're looking for 5 acres really close to the market that you're going to be selling at, maybe you're willing to spend a little bit more per acre than if you're farming 500 acres of corn and soy. So I think it's really context dependent.
That's a great point. Again, we want to emphasize we're here to have these kind of conversations with you for free, online, by phone, in person, whatever.